So I looked at 140,000 support employees, I'm trying to get out of your way here, with intellectual disabilities. I believe you call them learning disabilities in Sweden, so what we, mental retardation, intellectual disabilities is what we say in the United States. So these are all supported employees throughout the United States, 104,000 of them, every single one of them being funded by the government from 2002 to 2008. And I looked at how much money they earned, how much money they lost, how much money they had, the taxes paid. So this isn't an estimate, this is actually the real data. And I found that for every dollar that they give up in terms of taxes paid and their foregone wages and all the government subsidies that they did lose, they got back $4.02. So it's a 4-to-1 ratio. They did lose money, but they gained over $4 in terms of wages earned and everything else. Further, I found this too, even when you look at people with multiple disabilities, or really severe, profound disabilities, people that have intellectual disabilities and autism, or sensory impairments, multiple disabilities, regardless of the number of disabilities they had, or the types of disabilities that they had, they were better off working in the community than not working in the community. And this was a big kind of change in the United States. We're starting to really see that people with disabilities can work, and economically, they should work. It's to their advantage monetarily to go work in the community to earn money. Yes, they may lose government subsidies, but what they lose, they far more make up in wages earned. So in terms of the question, should they work? Is it a good investment for a worker to go from a sheltered setting to the community? The answer is yes. And in every study that I've done, in every US state, the answer has always been the same. People get more money from working than not working. And this was a big surprise for a lot of our policymakers. A lot of our politicians want to help people with disabilities, but they thought that by getting them and making them work in the community would actually hurt them. So this was a big kind of change in US policy. The second perspective to think about is the taxpayers, all of us. Now, should we have the money we give to the government go to supported employment, or should it be other programs? And that's another kind of perspective. From the taxpayer's perspective, when a supported employee pays taxes, that's good. That's more money into the tax base where we can do things and build roads and pay for police officers. The reduction in government subsidies is good for the taxpayer too. But there's a lot of cost to supported employment. It's expensive. So which outweighs what? And a lot of policymakers wanted me to figure that out. So I looked at about 250,000 supported employees. Again, this is all the supported employees in the United States. I have data on each and every one of them, thanks to the government. And they wanted to see what's the return on investment. So for every dollar of cost, that is, for every dollar that the taxpayer puts into supported employment programs, the taxpayers in the United States get $1.48 back. So it is economically viable. It's actually a good investment. Supported employee returns money back to the taxpayers in the form of the reduced costs of alternative programs such as sheltered workshops, but also the taxes paid and the government subsidies that are going down. And this was very surprising to a lot of policymakers. They didn't realize this. Further, when you look at the different disability groups, when you break it down by each kind of category of persons, every category that I looked at returned a positive outcome. That every group that we looked at, every group that's being served in the United States, returns more than $1 when you spend $1. So it's actually, try to get out of the way here, it's a good investment for all of them. For example, kids with traumatic brain injuries. They're very difficult to work with. They require a lot of services. They have a lot of issues. But even they return more than $1 for the services that they get provided. So the question that, should taxpayers pay for this? I'm always asked this. The answer seems to be yes. And I found that for all of the disabilities that we study, this holds true. From autism to intellectual disabilities to traumatic brain injuries, everybody seems to return a positive net benefit to society. I found, however, that that's not true in all states. And one of the reasons is there are a few states, how can I say this? In each state in the United States, they fund supported employment differently. For example, in some states we have a fee-for-service program where as a job coach, I got paid for every hour I worked with this person. Okay? So every hour I worked with this supported employee, I got paid so much money. Well, we're finding out that that way of funding support employment causes, it's not very effective, because I can just stay with this person whether they want me or need me. I can just stand there and go, oh, good job, yeah, good job, you know, and I'm making money. So for some states, that's not a very effective or efficient way of providing funding services. In other states, they pay me only when this person gets a job and keeps a job. So it's to my advantage to do a good job teaching this person and finding a good job match, placing them, allowing them to become independent, fading away, and then I get my money. So depending on how support employment is funded, seems to affect the outcomes as well. The biggest indicator, the biggest reason why supported employment is a good investment is because you compare it to the alternative. And in the United States, the alternative is sheltered settings or sheltered workshops. And when you look at the cost of sheltered workshops over the entire time someone is actually getting services, this is what you find. In the United States, it's about $20,000 to provide services for somebody in a sheltered setting over the course of the period that they're there. And if you notice, this trend goes upward. So over time, they get more costly services. So the longer that somebody's in a sheltered workshop in the United States, the more cost it is to the taxpayer. When you look at supported employment, however, the total cost of support employment to the taxpayer per person is usually about $6,000, $7,000. And if you notice, the cost goes down. This is really important because back in the 80s and 90s, people were looking at this and they were saying, well, wait a second, all these studies are finding that supported employment isn't very cost effective. It's too expensive. And that's true if you look at the first couple months. When you're working really one-on-one with somebody, you're getting them a job, you're training with them, you're there all the time. But as soon as you start fading supports away, the cost goes down, 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 down. So you have to look at the entire life of the supported employee, or the entire time that they have a job. And this is one of the reasons why. It's because sheltered workshops, in comparison, are so much more costly. So some strategies to kind of think about that. So we in the United States now are at least coming to the grips of, one, people with disabilities can work. They have the abilities to work. They have the desire to work. And that, two, they should work in terms of economics. They will earn more money. They earn poverty wages, and they need to work in the community so they can earn more. We're also realizing the third thing is that supported employment, by and large, is more effective and cost efficient than other placements, such as sheltered workshops. The question now that we're dealing with is, well, how do we make it even better? How can we make supported employment even more efficient and more effective? How do we take this money, this pot of money, and serve all the people that we have on our waiting list? In some places, we have waiting lists, 2 or 3 years long. So we have people that want to work, they can work, they have a desire to work, but they can't because they're waiting for people to get placed so that they can get placed. So the question is, how do we speed that up? Not make it quicker and bad outcomes, but how do we make it more effective so more people can keep their jobs for longer periods of time and we can do it quicker? In the United States, we have sheltered workshops, and their argument is that they are part of this process, this employment process. That first you start a person in a sheltered workshop, they get out of school, they go to the sheltered workshop, and then they go into supported employment. So that's their kind of philosophy. And then there's other people that say, no, we should just skip the sheltered workshop and put them right into the community right after school. So the question that I was asked by our policymakers was, well, which is true? What should we do? So what I did was I looked at 2 groups of supported employees, 5,000 or so in each group. And each group was matched by their demographics, their gender, their ethnicity, their age, all their disabilities, and so forth. So they're matched on like 11 different categories. One group was in a sheltered setting, and then was put in supported employment. And the other group just went to supported employment. Now my thought here was that if you put somebody in sheltered setting, they're going to learn something. Maybe not much, but it's better than nothing. So my initial thought was, well, the people that were in sheltered settings are going to be more employable. They're going to get more jobs than people that don't have that additional training, the people that didn't go into shelter workshops. Or they're going to be easier to train because they had this extra vocational training that the non-workshop group didn't have. When you look at the place-trained people, the people that were placed in the community and did not go to shelter workshops, about 60% of them got jobs, and at a cost of about $4,500 over their whole time. When you look at the other group, it's basically the same rates of placement, but the cost is substantially different. I'm sorry, wherever I move, I get in people's way. So one of the things that I found was that putting people in a sheltered setting first had a negative impact. That if you put them in a sheltered setting prior to the community, it seems what happens is they learn bad skills. For example, in the workshops that I used to work at, we'd have everybody kind of come in, sit at a table, and do certain things, and they were told what to do, when to do it, and it was very regimented. The community isn't like that. You have to use your initiative. You have to, like, if you see somebody, if you're working at a restaurant and a customer spills a drink, you can't wait to be told to clean it up. Our support employees need to be able to work and figure out what to do next. They can't always have a boss telling them what to do. So one of the things that I found out was if you put people in shelter workshops before support employment, they require far more services than individuals that are going out just from school to the community. So that the shelter workshops tended to have what's called like a negative value, that the value added to this individual, what they taught this individual, wasn't positive. It is that we as job coaches had to have them unlearn the behaviors that they learned in the shelter workshop, and that took more time, more effort, and more money. So one of the issues that we're finding out is that if you want to reduce the cost of support employment, you don't put them in shelter workshops beforehand. Because then they can get their job a lot easier, and they're able to be able to do things without us always telling them. Another issue that we have in the United States is in high school, kids with disabilities have to be prepared for adult life by age 16. So by federal law, we as teachers at age 16 and after, we have to start preparing them for adult life, like jobs and getting them jobs and things. So some states go above and beyond this, and they say, oh, we're going to do it by age 14. So the question is, well, does it matter when we start preparing kids with disabilities for adult life? Should we prepare them at age 14? Should we prepare them at age 16? Should we not prepare them at all? And some of our policymakers have even said to me, well, isn't all education valuable to the individual with a disability? Isn't teaching them reading and writing like you were doing in first grade and second grade and all the way through, isn't that valuable? Isn't all education employment education? So we didn't really know. So I did a study where I'm looking at states that have the requirement of age 14. And I found that about 80% of the students in those states became employed. And the cost per person was about $3,000. When you look at the states that had requirements of age 16, the rates of employment drop down significantly. They go to about 58%, 59%. Plus the costs skyrocket. So in other words, in order to increase the rates of support employment, start teaching them earlier. So getting them involved, talking to them about vocational outcomes, start focusing their educational training on what happens after school. That will not only increase the percentage of people that get employed, but will also decrease the amount of costs that people spend on them.